Hello, you're listening to the Eric McKenna Project.
All right, Lori, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm delighted. You brought along a guest today.
I did. It's my daughter, Phelan.
Hi.
She was driving this morning. We didn't let her drive all the way out here.
Okay.
But
Because I was tired.
yeah.
I wish I could use that excuse. That's pretty good. I might use that.
Yeah, 16 years old, driving now.
How about that?
Terrifying. Yeah.
It is terrifying. Yeah, I recently went through that myself.
Yes.
Twice, as I think you have as well, too, recently.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You doing okay? You driving well?
Yeah.
At least you think you're driving well, right?
Driving almost every day. You know, my dad's like, you got to get on the road every day. So, you know.
Right on.
Yeah. Just doing driving things.
They always say that's why parents drink, you know.
Yeah.
The problem starts there. Not when they're younger, but some people will dispute that, too.
Her first time behind the wheel, she just sat behind the wheel and said, zoom, zoom, and then swore, which so.
Oh,
allowed-
that made you
allowed to
feel
curse?
just fantastic.
I'm
I
like, we're going to
imagine.
go. Here we go.
Well, how are you both getting through the pandemic? It seems to be the reoccurring first question that we get asked every show.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you know, I mean, as writer type person, like this is kind of my ideal environment because I can just stay home most of the time. But you know, yeah, I mean, but it's like really strange to balance life all of a sudden. You know, where you're just constantly thinking, okay, we have to make something to eat again, and we have to eat again, and so you know, I mean, and my husband's a writer as well, so we're both like in our element, you know, where we're just sort of, you know, but the weirder part of that is that neither of us seems to be able to get a lot of work done because we're distracted by the world a lot. So
okay,
yeah,
you're not alone.
So, yeah, how are you getting through?
I'm okay. That's not fair. Especially when I'm not ready. Yeah, I think I've had a good pandemic. And when I say that, people laugh and they go, "What are you talking about?" It caused me to snap back to reality.
Yeah.
And I had to work on myself a little bit if I was going to spend this time because I was in real estate. I am in real estate, and I just could not work. None of us could. So having all that activity to shut down to nothing was an adjustment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you're sitting with yourself, going, "Okay, who am I? Why am I here?"
the big picture questions. Yeah, just working what I can and taking long walks. You know, I don't know what it was. Who was the writer that said years ago? It wasn't. Was it Thoreau? I don't know.
Probably. He
Probably.
walked a lot.
He walked a lot, yeah. And didn't he farm peas or something too?
And swam naked in lakes.
Yeah, I didn't do any of that stuff. Although it sounds interesting. I haven't done any of that stuff, but I did find. I found some. Maybe it was a regroup with light exercise. You know, in my aged years. So I don't know. It was just. It seemed to me that we were all going to be really in a unique position. I had to do something that made sense to me.
Yeah.
You know, did you find, were you able to make sense of not the entire circumstance, but did you get your sea legs after a couple of weeks? And
yeah, I mean, I really felt, I don't know, maybe a lot of people felt this, but I felt like the world was so crazy up until now, too. You know, I mean, this is crazy as well. But it just, things had gotten so busy and so chaotic, and I just felt like there was no time to take a moment, you know, and slow down. And so I think that's like the one upside of all of this is that you really have that moment to slow down and say, I'm going to take a walk, or, you know, playing a lot of tennis.
that's a good thing.
You know,
that's a great thing.
Except my husband beats me, and I was on the high school tennis team, and he shouldn't beat me at all, ever. He's like this very large man.
Does he remind you of that occasionally when he does?
Yeah, I mean, he's so arrogant. He's like a football player, but he moves like a gazelle on a tennis court. I'm like, this is impossible. This is not right. But yeah, I feel like it just gave us all a chance to sort of think about what really matters and who matters, and so.
Yeah, fear will do that to you.
Fear will do that to you. Yes, mortality will do that. Everything narrows down real fast. Yeah.
So overall, in doing my research to have you on this show, so I am not sitting here like a blooming idiot, a lot of really funny stuff from you. Dry wit, dry humor, however people smarter than me would phrase it. But yeah, so you knew this was going to come up right away because it was hysterical when I started to listen to some of prior interviews you've done. The title of one was all these things you were going to talk about and the sex chair.
Yeah.
I'm like, so I'm going through the podcast as fast as I can, skipping, okay, sex chair. Nope, that's not it. Where's the sex chair?
So yeah, and my daughter's here for the second conversation about this, so that's good parenting as always.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So that was a column I wrote for Modern Love for the New York Times, and then I ended up, it sort of went away for a while, which is probably a good thing when you have children. The chair is still in our house, but
so the chair didn't go away. The chair didn't go away.
It's still very present.
That's great.
But then I had to do a podcast about it, and it just resurfaced. It just resurfaces.
So someone dug that out for a show then. Huh?
Modern Love has a podcast that they did, the New York Times, and so they have celebrities that choose their favorite Modern Love column.
Right.
And Kristen Bell picked mine, and so she read that essay, and so now I have to explain it again. But
it's not going away.
It's never going to go away. But it was, it was an impulse buy back when my son was very, very young, and my husband and I, like you do, you still want to hold on to the person that you were before you had kids and a minivan.
Just who was that person?
Well, it's good parenting. So it's it was just one of those things, but it's just. My son still doesn't know what it is, so that's good. He thought it was a video game chair. He thought it was a chair for him to put his little guys, that he called his little army guys, on, like they were like attacking on a ridge.
I can almost see that, maybe.
Yeah. So,
somewhat.
And it's very comfortable. It's very sturdy, and it has lasted for years, as they promised. So it's I recommend it for those of you who don't have children, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know how you walk that one back. I mean, you just go with it, right?
You just gotta
go with it. Just go with it.
I didn't think it was quite so outrageous until everybody else did.
Isn't that the story of life, though?
Yeah.
Okay, my friend, so you are a Trafford native, is that right?
I am.
Okay.
Trafford, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and you left as life will take you, and of course, as most Western Pennsylvania folks, you come back.
Oh yeah, I met a guy. Well, I moved away and moved to New York as we do. I met a guy in a bar there who said, "You're from Pittsburgh." I said, "Yeah," and he said, "Oh, homing pigeon," and I'm like, "Yeah, we all go away and we come back."
That's gotten as far as New York, then, huh? They know.
Yeah. They know us. They got our number. But yeah, I mean, growing up in Trafford, I just felt like if you want to be a writer and artist, you move to New York and you go to Paris, and those are the things that you do. And you can't be an artist or a writer if you come from Trafford, which is an old mill town. When they talk about New Pittsburgh, it's like, that's not my Pittsburgh. That's not my Pittsburgh at all.
Right.
So, I moved away, and I was a flight attendant based in New York, and had no intention of ever coming back, like we do. No intention.
Of course not. I'm cosmopolitan now.
Right, of course. Like, I'm a New Yorker. I stand online now, not in line. But then my father got really sick and my mom got really sick, and I had to move home. And then I met my husband, and then I got a job, and then, I was on leave from the airline that I worked for until my daughter here was about 3 years old, and I got called back, and and I by that time my life was so rooted back home that I was, I was really tempted to go back, and I planned to go back actually. And the morning that I was supposed to report at the airport, I got all dressed in my suit and put my hair up, and I went in to see my daughter, who's in this room right now, who she didn't speak a lot until she was about 3.
That changed.
Yeah, it's changed a lot.
And I mean that in a very kind way.
No, she said, as we were driving here, she said, "I've been talking nonstop," and I'm like, "Yeah."
It's okay.
But her brother spoke at 6 months, and he never stopped, and so she didn't really have any reason to talk until she was about 3. But I went in
now
to
she's
say
catching up.
She's catching up. But I went in to say goodbye to her because I was going to go away, and we had to go for training for, I was going to be gone for 3 weeks, and I had never been away from my kids at this point. I mean, and she woke up, which she never does, and she woke up and she said, "Where are you going?" And I just said, "Nowhere." And I took my suit off, and I went back to bed, and that was the end of my flight attendant career.
No kidding.
Which, retroactively really stupid, because I could have just retired or something and had flight benefits. But it was my realization that I was home for good, and that was that. So
when you look back on your life, whether it's a career or family, that was a moment for you.
It was a huge moment, because I was, I was like, wow, I've gone from this person that was completely rootless, to somebody who's so rooted she's like, she can't even get on an airplane because, So I'm back in Trafford. That's where I am.
Yeah, back in Trafford. A lot of similarities between Trafford and where you sit right now in terms of it's old Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I was a little confused. I'm always confused. But in regards to how many books you actually have done, because your bio says 3 and then another book of essays, which sometimes get lumped in as a book as well, but Amazon, other places, and other review sites have you listed as 4 books. So is it 3 memoirs? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then 1 is a book of essays. Is that correct?
Yep. 3 memoirs. God help me. 1 book of essays. Which
You needed 3?
I know. And I'm working on a 4th. So, and a book of essays, which are memoir too, and a book of poems, and then a bunch of little collections of poetry. So I don't know. So 4, let's say 4, 5.
I'm just trying to
5.
be correct, Lori. I'm trying
5.
to make sure this is just trying to be correct. The first official book though, was that Miss New York Has Everything?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So in prior discussions, you had mentioned something that the public was a tad confused when they saw the cover because it shows you in a flight attendant uniform, and there's a connotation that goes with where that's headed.
Right.
And then it was a little bit of that and a whole bunch more. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the book is about half about growing up in Trafford, Pennsylvania, which people who buy a book with a flight attendant on the cover with international suitcases all around are thinking they're going to get something else. So I think that was confusing to people. But the most confusing thing that happened with that book, which is the funniest thing to me now, then not so much, but my publicist hooked me up with a book signing at Sam's Club.
Okay.
It was a big grand opening of Sam's Club, and
locally, or was it somewhere?
Locally, outside of Pittsburgh. Okay. And it was a big one, and I was like, Sam's Club, no. And she said, no, really, Sedaris does Costco, so you should do Sam's Club.
Okay.
And I said, okay. So I went out to the Sam's Club, and there had been some kind of miscommunication between my publicist and the Sam's Club people. It was a grand opening. They had free hot dogs, free cake, they had balloons, they had clowns, they had the whole thing. But I went into the Sam's Club, and I wasn't sure where I should go. And so I went to the customer service desk, and I said, hey, I'm me. I'm supposed to be here for a book signing. They're like, we have no idea what you're supposed to do. And I hung out for a while, and they're like, we'll figure it out. And I looked to the left of where I was standing, and there's a huge flashing used car lot sign. I'm not kidding, with an arrow. And it says, come meet me, my name. And so I'm like, oh, that's me. I'm going to go over there because that's my name. And the woman's like, whatever. And the bottom part of the sign was obscured by huge piles of toilet paper because at Sam's Club, you couldn't see the bottom of the sign. So I walk towards the sign, and I notice there are a lot of middle-aged men waiting in line.
Okay.
Lots of cologne. And it's all men. And I'm feeling really good about myself because I'm like, my agent, my publicist said men don't read my books. And I'm like, look, that's my audience. They are all here for me because they read my book. And so I'm walking and I'm like, hey, how you doing? Hey, and they're looking really confused. And I go up and I get around the corner past the toilet paper, and it says on the big flashing used car lot sign, come meet Lori Jakiela, Miss America.
Wait.
Because the title of my book is Miss New York Has Everything, so there was something that was lost in translation.
Miss America.
Miss America. And I froze, and then I saw, and my name was on the table, and my title, Miss America, and there were all these books, my books, and I'm like, well, they did order a lot of books. They were right about that. So I walked around the table, and I sat down, and the abuse just started. And it was it was relentless. I've never seen more disappointed looking stream of men in my life. One even looked under the table and said, those aren't even your legs on the cover of your book. And I'm like,
my gosh, are you serious?
I'm so serious.
Are you serious?
And the only reason I know everything that happened to me is because the only thing I could do, because I was so humiliated, was I just kept taking notes of things that people said to me, things that happened. And it was hysterical. Finally, the manager came over and like unplugged the sign and turned my name over and said, do you want a hot dog? And I'm like, I do. I want a hot dog.
There was that.
Well, there was that. I don't think I sold a single book.
My gosh.
Yeah. So, so people were confused by that book. Just a bit.
Don't say. Now, leading up to I don't know where to go with that. Leading up to that, you have been writing, I would imagine, essays prior. You've been writing poetry. What led you to the first book? This was your first actual. Was the book a collection of essays, or was it actually? Did you set out to write a book?
Well, I set out to preserve my job. So I had gotten hired at Pitt. When I got hired at Pitt, they said, well, within 5 years, you need to have a book, you need to have an agent, you need to be in the New York Times, and all this. It was crazy stuff. And none of it was true.
The university said that to you?
My mentor at the university, who actually had never done any of these things herself, but just told me that.
Of course not.
She gave me a list that I hung above my computer, and it said, this is what I had to do.
On a Post-it note.
Yeah. And they hired me to teach prose. So I had been, I gotten a master's degree in poetry.
Right.
God help me, from Trafford, Pennsylvania, with a master's in poetry, but I did. And so I thought, well, I'm going to have to start, writing prose. But at the time, I was writing poems that were really failed poems. They were these long, sort of clunky things, and they were becoming essays. Anyway.
Okay.
So I bumbled around a lot, and I think what I wrote was a collection of essays that were connected, like sort of linearly. Mm-hmm. And then when I got my agent, which is another funny story, but
do tell.
She repped Marley and Me. You might have heard of that book. Yeah, so a lot of our conversations were around, well, if you had written about a dog, or if your mother was a parrot, it could really blow up your career. Oh my God. But she was lovely, and she was wonderful and helpful. And she said, well, I can't sell a book of essays, so we need to connect these.
Okay.
And so I started to work on it with her. And then when my editor, when they bought the book, I had one conversation with my editor who said, you're missing time between this time and this time. Tell me a story about what happened to you when you were, this age. And I would say, well, I had an aunt who was a nun who was also a narcotics addict. And she's like, yeah, that's good. Write about that. And so those are our conversations. So we actually, when they bought the book, they bought a book that was half the size of what it actually turned out to. And then I wrote the filler so that they could see it as a complete memoir. So that's a long answer to your question.
No, that's the answer I was looking for. So is it possible that a lot of the books that people read start out as collections of essays?
Yeah.
So we did see chapters. Ultimately, they could have been written as a standalone essay.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times,
I never knew that.
And a lot of times, the great thing about that is that if you're looking to publish things sort of independently of a whole collection, those things that stand alone, you can publish as essays and then tuck them into the book, and you get shrimped 3 ways or 2 ways. But so yeah. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for anybody else who writes memoir, but the way these things happen, I mean, life is so unorganized and disconnected and staticky that it's not going to come out in this like nice fluid and I was born and and it was just great and all this. I think you're trying to make sense as you go, so the smaller pieces make more sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, there isn't a magic pill. 'Cause all of us think, these writers just sit down and they start and then they finish like a week later, and there's nothing in between. There's no stops and starts and re-examinations. It just starts and they're done.
Oh yeah, no, it's such a terrible thing to do with your life. Writing is bad.
Thing to do with your life. That's like a painter will say, it's the most torturous thing in the world, and the person that's not a painter looks at that and goes, I don't get it. They don't understand everything that goes into it.
Yeah.
The torment, the emotional torment.
But painting seems fun, doesn't it?
It does. Writing seems fun too, though.
Yeah, but painting, you get to play with things. Like writing, you sit in the basement alone, vitamin D deprived,
that's
pushing
not the
words
picture
around.
I had. See that? Okay, that's a whole different picture of writing that I had.
It's just not the glamorous, I'm drinking in Paris cafes that I thought it was.
And things just come to me without,
yes.
not even having to really put any effort into it.
You just put the little beret on and smoke the cigarette.
Beret.
It would be ridiculous if people didn't do that.
Well, of course. When the first book was published and you actually saw it, that had to be a thrill.
Oh yeah, it was a thrill. And the weekend before it first came out, though, I sort of went into the fetal position because I realized for the first time, because I'd been writing poems, and who cares? Right. I mean, poets read poems, right?
Okay.
You're mostly writing for a very small audience.
Okay.
And I realized this book anyone could read. Anyone in my family, anyone I've ever known, anyone from childhood, and it was going to be in bookstores. Remember bookstores?
Yeah.
And people would be able to just go and get it. And I really freaked out because I had been free to say whatever I wanted in poems forever. And all of a sudden I was like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that, or also that, or maybe that too.
Okay.
Oh God.
No, wait a second. You said you were free to say what you want in poems. Why? Because it was a smaller audience? You weren't worried about it?
Smaller audience. And also people in my family were not particularly likely to stumble on a collection of
they were
poems.
out there. They were out there, but they were hidden.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was I was back in grad school and I published a poem in the Post-Gazette, which is where, one of the newspapers in the country that publishes poems. And my mother's neighbor called her and said, see, Lori's got a poem in the Post-Gazette. And my mom said, yeah. And she said, I cut it out and put it on my fridge. And my mom said, that's great. And the neighbor said, I don't understand it, but that's art. So that's an easier way to be as a writer when you can get away with things that people. And it wasn't that I was writing anything obscure because I just don't. It's not my thing. Coming from where I come from, I think obscurity is like a privilege that I don't have.
Okay.
But. Something about breaking it into lines would confuse people, but all of a sudden when you have a book of straightforward prose,
right. Right.
So you're now held accountable. And I was held accountable. Like, people showed up on my doorstep with parts of the book highlighted. People said, you can change all the names you want. We know who everybody is. My friend Donnie refers to himself as page 33.
I wanted a nickname anyways.
Yeah. I mean, it's a different experience.
So that's a good question. So even by changing the names to protect the guilty, it really doesn't solve the problem.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't at all. I mean, Anne Lamott, who's one of my favorite writers, always says, if people wanted to appear better in your books, they should have behaved better. Which is true, and yet. And then other people will say, well, they could write their own book. And it's like, well, they're not probably likely to do that because writing is terrible. So as I've moved on, like, gotten older as a writer and, as a person, a human, I'm more careful with people now than I used to be, which doesn't mean that the things I write don't upset people, because sometimes they do.
I think they need to touch emotionally, or it's not as authentic or as valid, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's that, and it's, well, when you're writing memoir, of course, you're dealing with, real living people, right? A lot of the times, or the memories of people that have passed on that you're responsible for. But I mean, my husband writes fiction. Sure he does.
Sorry, Dave.
He does invent things a lot in his work, but a lot of the people that are in his books are real people, including me as a character.
How's that go over?
It's great. Except the one time there was a book reviewer who will remain nameless, who was angry with me because of something a character named Lori did in one of my husband's novels.
Really?
Which I did not do in real life. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it, but I didn't.
Her eyebrows raised over there.
Yeah. It was just the character had referred to the book reviewer as Ponytail Guy, which, I mean, totally in my wheelhouse, but did not do it. Did not do that. So.
Oh my
but
God.
yeah,
is when you look out at the world, because your view of life has to be just so different. Similar things that we all go through, right? But your viewpoint of it has to be different than the average person, because you can pull the inside out of it, find humor, and then express it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's different. It may be a disorder. I mean, writers by our nature, but like all artists are like super observant, right?
I think.
But there's always the joke with writers. It's like we should have a T-shirt, or we should have a bell around our neck that anything that you do in front of us is material. And any nothing's off limits. I think very well for me. There are a few things that are off limits.
Okay.
And especially as my children get older. I mean, they have their own stories. They're entitled to their own stories. So
Sure.
I try to be really careful with them.
Sure.
And
Your poor kids.
I know. With Phelan, I clear things with her now.
Yeah.
And I
You
say,
open up, yeah.
Yeah, I say, I've
always
written this piece about you, and I want you to check it out and see if it's okay.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes I've cried over it.
Yeah, well, the crying,
There was
And
one-
as a mother, I feel bad about the crying, but as a writer, I'm like, yes.
Yeah, there's some honesty for you.
Yeah, I remember the one, what was it? The one essay you wrote. It was something like Boston Market was involved. It was something about like,
Oh, yeah.
I was scared of you dying. I was like, oh man, that's the one that got
Okay.
me. That's the one. I don't know how to describe that. Like, how do you describe that one?
Well, it's about death.
Sums it up for me.
And mac and cheese, which is delicious. Mac and cheese is a good reason to stay alive, right?
Oh my God. Oh my God, that's great. Oh my God. Death and mac and cheese.
Death and mac
There might
and
be a whole book in that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
We have gone like 15 different directions here. This is amazing. I'll somehow figure this out. Do you
trying to
journal?
behave.
Do you journal?
I'm supposed to say yes.
You can say anything you want.
No, because you told me before we started that you journal, and I admire
A lot.
that so much.
I don't know if I admire it.
It's really great. No, I'm not disciplined like that. I mean, I wish I were, because like I told you with the Sam's Club story, if I had like documented things in my life like that, my life would be so easy.
There's a whole book in that Sam Club.
There's a lot, but you know, I wish I did. But I think
assumed you did, because it's everything you're writing is a lot of it seems to be observational.
Yeah, I mean, I have a great memory for things that don't matter sometimes, or you know, like I have long-term memory. I'll sit with things for a while, and they're sort of like I always feel like they're just in your DNA sometimes.
Okay.
And I met Allen Ginsberg, the poet, a while back when he came to Pittsburgh. I was in charge of him for the day, which was not...
I can't imagine.
Oh, so bad. But one thing he said is this writing exercise that he used to tell people, and I don't know whether he ever did it himself because he lied about a lot of things.
Okay.
But he said he would write something and then he would crumble it up and throw it across the room and then write it again from memory, because your mind remembers only that which is good and only that which you need for your work.
How about that?
So he felt like everything else was sort of like static, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's sort of with me with journaling. Like I figure if I forget something, I don't need it. And if I remember it and can't let it go, I'll have to write through it. And then sometimes after I write through it, I can let it go and just sort of forget about it and move forward. But
That's an interesting perspective.
yeah, but if I journaled a lot, I think I would have so much
Would be too much
material.
maybe.
Yeah, overwhelming, you know. It's like I have to like limit the input, you know.
Huh. Here's a random question for you. You'll love this one. No, I think it's a little esoteric, but does ego help with the writing process, the creative process?
Writing's all about ego, right? It's all about ego. It's all about saying, I matter. You know, my husband and I, a while ago, his great-grandfather, who was in his late 90s when he died, we helped put together a book for him of his stories. He grew up in West Virginia. He grew up like in a holler, and then he became very successful and literally like was eating roadkill as a kid, and then you know was living in a mansion.
That down there,
Hey, you don't waste. It's good. But we recorded conversations with him, then transcribed it and made a book for him. And my mother-in-law, who's a lovely person, said, I don't understand why he thinks he's so special about her dad, that he should have a book. I said, well, everybody is. Everybody's special. There's no, Studs Terkel, who's one of my heroes, said there's no such thing as an ordinary life. So it's like the miracle of being a person.
Right.
You're born, you live a while, you die, right? Isn't that funny? It's funny. It is kind of.
Okay. I never looked at it that way, but yeah, I can see that now.
Yeah. But that's like the truth of all of us, right? But as a writer, the active ego is, you know, I'm born, I live a while. Let me tell you, you know, I was here and I did these things and this mattered and maybe you matter too, you know? So the idea is always like it's an active ego to create the thing, but it's an act of trying to connect with other people who can read it and say, me too, I felt like that too. And so that you're less lonely in the world, I think. You know, but I think from the very beginning, you have to have some kind of delusion that you know something that's worth sharing with someone.
Well,
you know?
Talk about that. So what kind of doubt goes through your mind when you begin to become a writer, or you just decide, I am going to be a writer? Because that doubt has to be heavy in the beginning, I would imagine.
I think I'm sorry. I think that the doubt happens later.
Really?
I think early on you're just like, I'm the best
Naive.
ever. No, my
yeah.
poor college roommate.
I
Oh
can
my
do this.
God, she, my college roommate Jane, who grew up to be a librarian, of course. I would wake her up at 3 a.m. in undergraduate school and say, Jane, I just wrote this poem. It's the best thing ever. Let me read it to you. Let me read it to you again. And she would tolerate this, and she would be like, okay, that's really good. Okay, go to bed now. I'm like, okay. And then I'd wake up the next morning, and I'd read it, and it would be total crap. And I'd be like, oh, I thought it was good. And she's like, no, it's not good.
That's one way I could sleep.
Yeah. But like, so I think the better you get as a writer, which is another reason why writing is terrible, like the better you get, the more you doubt it, the more you push yourself to try to like say something that really matters, you know, the more you revise, the more, for me anyway, and again, it's different for everybody. I think one thing that I had doubt in early on is, you know, who do you think you are, which is something that people said where I came from a lot. Okay. Who do you think you are with that book? Who do you think you are with that? Do you think you're smart? Who do you think you are? So there was that idea that to say I wanted to be a writer was not an acceptable thing to say, because that was for rich people. So I would say I want to be a journalist, which is what my first love really started. Well, my first love was poetry, but then I went to journalism, then I went back to poetry, because that was a job, and people could understand that there was a value to that.
That's interesting.
If you're going to say, I'm going to write novels, you're going to be like, get the crap beat out of you in Trafford. You're going to find your body down by the Sulphur Creek. So, you know, so there's a lot of doubt in that. Like, you know, what do you think that means that you want that? Who are you to want that? You know? Okay.
So validation from others around you at the time.
Yeah. Not even validation, you know, acceptance maybe.
Okay.
My parents were really great. I mean, I was adopted, and they were nuts, don't get me wrong, absolutely off the wall. But they were really supportive. And I think they would like sort of shrug things off and say, well, she's weird like that because she's adopted. Or she's, you know, she's artsy. We're not really sure what to do with that. But when I was really young, I can't even remember how old I was, they bought me a typewriter. As a gift. I didn't ask for it. They just bought it. And I still have it. Although my children
Does it work?
have destroyed it or tried to. It was more her brother. It was more her brother. But it was a little Royal portable typewriter.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like the first time I thought, oh my God, you know, it's okay.
Yeah, I get that.
You know? And it was pretty cool.
I bet.
So, yeah.
And you wrote a book about your journey. To understand your adoption, because understand is a big word too.
Yeah.
That was the word I came with.
Yeah.
After hearing you talk about the book.
Yeah, I mean, and then that's a book again. Like you talk about, well, you write something and you think you're not going to hurt people, but people are going to get hurt no matter what.
I can imagine.
And you write about something like that, but yeah.
Is that your most serious work to date?
Yeah. You know.
With humor weaved in, I'm sure.
Yeah, you know, I humor is really, I think it's so important because it's, that's where the truth is, right? Because everything's not very serious or very funny all the time. It's both all the time. But yeah, that book, it's called Belief is Its Own Kind of Truth, Maybe. I write really long titles.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
People are like, what's your book title? I'm like, do you have a minute? I'll tell you. But yeah, that was about, well, Phelan, who's here, when she was born with a birth defect that I had. And I had no medical information. It's sort of a thing with adoptees. You just don't get to know anything about your past, really. And so I thought, oh, man, this is really getting scary. But also, my father had died, my mom died, and I was grieving, but I didn't even realize I was still grieving. It was like a year later, you know. And so I went on this adoption search, which was, you know, it wasn't the really happy, gorgeous thing that you see on TV, you know, at all. And I thought I was going to get medical information for my daughter and for my son, and what I really wanted was to heal. And I did through the process, but it was, you know, super painful. And that book that we were talking earlier about, like, does it come out in essays? Does it come out? How does it come out? And that book was just coming out in like spurts, like just, you know, these little vignette sort of moments. Things would happen, and I would write them, and things would happen, and you know, and it still took 5 years, I think, to actually write the book.
So initially, you didn't set out to write a book. when the process started.
Yeah,
you were just writing as you always do. Right?
Yeah, as I always do. But when I met my birth brother, I met a couple of the members of my family, and he said to me instantly, "Do not write about this." And I said, "I can't promise you that, ever." I said, "I can promise I'll show you what I write, but I can't promise I won't write about it." You know, so and that's the pact where, you know, the difference between being maybe a better person or wanting to be a writer, you know, it becomes a line, you know.
It has to be a very difficult line, though. Huh?
It's really difficult, and you know, I would like to say I would want to always be the better person, but I'm a writer too, you know, and it's like it's really what I do, and it's the way that I take in the world, and it's the thing, you know. So yeah, so that was really hard, because I know there were many things in that book that, you know, people would not have wanted me to say.
That's such a tough position. From an outsider looking in, like, does every writer have their own guidelines that they go up to and they won't cross? But it's different. Has to be for every writer, correct?
Yeah, it's really different for every writer, because if you ask my husband, he would say I have no boundaries, none, zero. And I think that's a lie a little bit. I think he has a couple, you know, but yeah, everybody's code is different. You know, like what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, in pursuit of this thing that we call sort of like amorphously truth, right? So, how can you tell the truth that needs to be told, that's your truth, and hurt people the least? And you know, and again, it's partly like, for me, my personal code is don't write with malice. Don't ever write to get even with someone. Don't write to hurt someone intentionally, even though they may be hurt by what you do. Don't do it. Like, don't make people joke, because that's not nice, you know. And I also try to be, and I learned from David Sedaris, actually, just try to be twice as hard on myself as I am on anyone else I write about, as if that levels the playing field somewhat, which in my mind I can say that it does. Okay. But for other people, I don't think I don't think there's anything that can level the playing field. You know, it's not.
I get it.
Yeah. So
you mentioned truth in there. Would you not say the truth definitely, in terms of our day in, day out lives, truth is very subjective.
Yeah.
And when you say that to someone that's not a person that is relatively a creative person, a more analytical thinking person, they don't understand that concept.
Right.
Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in writing nonfiction, for instance, which is what memoirs sort of falls under, essays fall under, we talk about this distinction between an emotional truth and a factual truth, right? Facts can be checked, right? You can check dates, you can check times, you can check locations, you can do lots of research if you're writing about a certain time period. Emotional truth can't be checked, can't be fact checked, right? So it's how you remember something as opposed to how someone else remembers it, how it impacts you as opposed to how it impacts someone else. And my favorite thing I say to my students all the time is, okay, so you're at Thanksgiving dinner with your entire family. Your perception of what happened at that dinner versus your Aunt Peggy's perception of what happened at that dinner. You're both in the same room at the same time doing the same things. You're all the star of your own movie. They're going to see it completely different. So that sort of is the way, you know, when people will say, oh, it didn't happen like that, it happened like this. It's like, well, it happened like that and like this.
Right.
You know, which is where you get into this philosophical,
right.
You know, we should be all smoking medical marijuana when we do this. It's legal in Pennsylvania, medical only. But we really, you know, I mean, the idea of truth was something that I was really grappling with in that book. You know, because when you grow up as an adopted person or as any person, I think we're a component of what we actually remember from our own lives and what we've been told we remember. You know what I mean? And what we've been told about ourselves. And so it's all a construct, not to get like really super academic weird, but
no,
you know.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. And that's that whole concept of truth, I think, is lost on so many people, because it's lost on me at times too, because I can't understand why someone can't remember what I remember when we were both there 3 months ago.
Right.
But it's viewpoint and optics, and it's the different reality.
It is sort of, but I think there's a difference between emotional truth and alternative facts, which we have to deal with all the time in our world right now, and that's lying. Mm-hmm. Alternative facts are lies. When we talk about fact checking our politicians, for instance, it's like, those are lies. Mm-hmm. And that's not the same. It's not the same as I remember it differently, or I remember, do you know what I mean? So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But then that's happening. Hopefully that fact checking is happening for political purposes in relatively short order.
Yeah.
But with literature, do you find I guess I'm confused in this regard. Mm-hmm. You label a biography, an autobiography, a memoir, and then you label fiction.
Right.
Okay. There shouldn't really be blurred lines between those, but there are.
Right. Yeah.
Naturally, because of human nature.
Right.
I'd imagine.
Yeah. So the way, in terms of like writers, the way we define the difference, right? Autobiography goes from birth to death, right? Mm-hmm. And you usually have to be famous to write that. Memoir, essays, personal essays sort of fall under the umbrella of here's a moment in time that I'm going to look at, and I'm going to write about that moment in time when something happened, like something happened that I want to figure out, or, something transformative happened to me, and then I'm going to just sort of write through that. So it's a limited time space. Mm-hmm. And anything that's called nonfiction is like, in theory, supposed to be true. And then we get back to this issue of truth, right? What is truth? But the pact with the reader is I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to do the best of my ability to tell you a true story. I'm going to check out things that I can check out, and other things you're just going to have to trust me. And I hope that's okay. Mm-hmm. In fiction, you don't have to worry about any of that. So even if you're writing totally autobiographical fiction, if you call it fiction, you get a pass. So you don't ever have to really fully answer for the behavior of yourself as a character, which is an interesting thing too, when people start to hold you accountable for things that you do in your books.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It's like, and again, because my daughter's here, one of the things people would often say to me, I would often go and do book clubs, which is an interesting thing. And they would say, "What are you going to do when your kids read your books?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I'm like, "Well, I hope that by the time my kids have lived with me for 16, 18, 19 years, they will know what they're dealing with. So it's not going to be a shock." But I mean, the self that you portray, I mean, everything that you do, in art is, you frame yourself however you want. Through whichever lens you want. But in nonfiction, that lens should have a truth to it. You know what I mean? Being as honest as you possibly can about yourself. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, you just jump off the cliff and say, I did my best. This is as good as I can do.
So are there a lot of fiction works out there that are autobiographical? They're basically autobiographies, but the names have all been changed, and some of the details have been changed to create this, I won't say illusion of fiction, but kind of it's an illusion of fiction.
It's the whole term memoir and all those things is pretty contemporary kind of label.
Okay.
So one of my favorite writers in the whole entire world, and it's very unfashionable, and I'm not supposed to say this because I am a woman, but is Ernest Hemingway. I love Ernest Hemingway, and I'm not apologizing.
Okay.
But I mean, obviously, The Sun Also Rises is autobiography.
Absolutely.
With the names changed.
No doubt.
Movable Feast was not called a memoir. Obviously, it is a memoir. Mm-hmm. So it's at some point, I feel like it's an academic argument. I feel like readers. I can't speak for readers. I guess I would say. Sometimes with memoir, maybe readers come to it with an expectation like, oh, this is a real person and it has more value because it's a real person.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe. I don't come to it like that. A good book to me is a good book. but I have written 2 terrible novels, which are still being revised.
Okay.
And I find it both freeing that I can do whatever I want, and absolutely too much freedom. Too much freedom.
Okay.
It's like, what if I have this character do this now? There's an entire book of like fiction writing exercises and guidelines called What If? And I'm like, the what if is the problem. And with nonfiction memoir, you know what happened. Like you already have that story laid out for you.
Right.
How you shape it is where
Right.
the creative part comes in. But yeah.
Are most successful fiction books, would you guess, successful being ones that are the bestsellers, there's elements of truth in those books, though. Some of the characters in there have to be what the writers either experienced or people that they knew. There's always elements of reality in those stories, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's the only way that you can recreate the world is like take the truth that you know and sort of, you know, shape it into this crazy Play-Doh thing. But it's all already there, you know.
But it's not as alluring to you to do that than do a memoir.
For me personally, oh, it's so alluring. I'm just bad at it.
Again, I love the honesty. That's great. That's great.
You know, I'm trying. I'm still trying. I'm trying to finish this last novel again. But I have so many choices I can do, you know, and it's like going to the grocery store and seeing like 900 types of bread. I know. I can't take
Just give me some nickels and we get out of the door, right?
One of the other things about the pandemic is it like sort of limits our choices and our options, which for me is a helpful thing.
In theory, we're not supposed to say that, you know, but it's in reality it makes things easier.
Yeah.
And I can imagine when you have a palette there and you're a writer and you can do or say you can express anything.
Yeah.
The story could take any shape, go any direction. You could probably what if yourself to death.
Yeah. I have friends who are working on novels, you know, and they'll be like, oh, I'm about 60 pages out from the end. And I'm like, how do you know that? I'm like, you're magic. How
What
do
if
you
he wants
know
to kill somebody else?
I'm like, yeah, he's going to do something. You have no idea what's going to happen.
Oh my God, that is great. That is so great. That is so great. I find the adoption issue a big issue. I was not adopted. My grandmother was, and she was, I could tell, tormented her entire life because of that. And in those decades, it was very difficult to do any kind of investigative work to track it down. What did you get out of, as you can look back on it now, what did you actually get out of it emotionally that you can look back on, learning what you learned? And does it look a little different now, a couple of years removed from it?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up like a lot of adopted kids, you know, not from your grandma's time, but from my time, which was like, oh, it's no big deal. I was adopted. It's totally cool. I'm totally fine with that. It's totally cool. I don't have any problems. I don't have any issues. No issues. No issues here. Nothing. And I think going through that whole process made me confront the fact that, yes, I do. Okay. I have issues, and they're big. And, you know, and it explained to me, like, why my family is so important to me. Like, my family, my daughter, my son, my husband. You know, and when I say family, it's like really this narrow little
you need
chunk.
Material.
Yeah, well, definitely. Thank God for that.
you need material somewhere, right? Yeah. We're getting too serious there for a second.
Yep. I know. Oh, but I mean, like, yeah, it made me sort of face myself and be more honest with myself about things, and sort of explained some patterns that, you know, are sort of classic. Like, if you pay any attention at all to adoption literature, it's like I was textbook, but I was like refusing to acknowledge it. So yeah, and it made me accept my life, I suppose, you know, and where it was, and be really grateful for where it is now. You know, this idea of connection that I have. and rootedness, which again, talk about textbook adoptees. I'm like, flight attendant, that's my jam. Live in hotel rooms, love it. Take off, yes. Take me
No
up.
roots.
30,000 feet up is very comfortable for me. But I was literally clueless about my own
Okay.
problems with that. And now I'm cool. Totally fine.
Yeah, totally cool. Totally cool. I think you're cool. You got a cool daughter?
Thanks.
Yep.
No argument out of me. When I talk to musicians, they often talk about their albums or their songs or their tours or whatever it is. They talk about them as those things being like their children in a way. Not to compete with their children, but they're like these little... So... Does a project take on a life of its own? Do you look at it like that or not?
Well, I think once you have children, only children are children.
She had to say that. Come on, Lord. Let's get down to the brass tacks here.
Oh, I know. But, when you take a
She's
book
driving
from...
home, right?
Yeah. No.
Again, honesty.
But, it takes a book from, the time it gets to a publisher till the time it's published, is 9 months to a year. So everybody jokes, it's like you're birthing a baby. And it's like, yeah, no, but I'm at the point now as a writer, I want to see a project through to conclusion. I want to sort of, I was going to say close that chapter. That's so bad. Take the book, put it on the shelf, and get on to the next one. So I think I was more precious with my first book than
Sure.
And as you move on, you get less and less precious with yourself. I hope, thank God. Because with my first book, I was going to the hospital because I was pregnant with Phelan,
Right.
and I was, I was going to the hospital because I thought I was in labor all the time. I was just stressed out about, get so excited. It's like, oh, your book's going to auction. It's like, I gotta go to the hospital right now. I'm going to give birth to this one and that one. So the doctors are finally like, don't call us, we'll call you, And it's like, you're not going to give birth right now. So.
A couple false alarms there.
Yeah.
Talk about the bridge to take when things get serious.
That's another memoir.
I know it is.
So,
But the titles, though, because you can go 5 different directions with that title.
yeah, well, that's an old Pittsburgh joke. Do you know that joke?
Oh,
It's bad. It's a bad joke. So my mom...
we do bad jokes here.
My mom was a nurse, and my dad was a mill worker. And so... and my mom was a nurse in Braddock, and my dad, he grew up in Braddock. So there's a giant bridge there, the Westinghouse Bridge, which the joke is that's the bridge to take when things get serious. That's the bridge you jump off of.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know this is really old Pittsburgh, but the hospital workers and the mill workers all had poles running, like money. They would bet money, and you put money in the pot. And then when somebody jumped, whoever's day it was, got the money. So
my God.
it's really, really,
No,
really
I did not
dark.
know that.
And the reason, and also there's not a lot of water under that bridge. So,
Correct.
so there you go.
Yeah,
So I grew up with this kind of sense of humor, which
you don't say.
yeah. So that's where the title comes from.
Okay.
It's become a running joke in our family. Every time we want to take the long way home, we go over a bridge. Phelan's like, it's serious. We're going to take the bridge. So, but that I didn't realize until I moved away that take the bridge is not an expression everywhere else other than Pittsburgh.
Right.
So, yeah, but it was... but the title comes from the memoirs about moving back home, and it sort of follows where my first book leaves off. And that adjustment, moving back home, becoming a caregiver for my mom who was sick, meeting my husband, getting adjusted to a job on the ground, which my flight attendant friends still say, oh, they clipped your wings, you're on the ground now. It was the most horrible thing you could imagine, is just being grounded.
Right.
So it's a lot about that, and so bridges were always really important to me growing up, obviously.
Well, you're in the right town for it.
Exactly, better than Venice. Did you see that Venice is saying that the tourists are too fat for the gondolas?
Oh, you got to be
Nope,
kidding me.
especially Americans. They're
You
limiting.
got to be kidding
They're
me.
limiting the number of tourists that can go into the gondola, which is so funny and so true.
My wife always says that. She comes home. She's Plaza International.
Yeah.
She comes home and goes, my gosh, we eat a lot of food around here.
Yeah,
I go, you eat a lot of food around here. You just don't put any weight on.
it's because she's running all the time.
I guess so.
Yeah.
There was a book that I think it was, I'm confused now. It was Spot the Terrorist.
Yes.
Is that a collection of essays?
It's poems.
Technically, that's poems.
Those are poems about flight attendants.
Was that after 9/11?
That was before 9/11.
No kidding.
Well, it was published after 9/11.
Huh.
When was it published? I don't even know my own books. So it was published after 9/11. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
But it's not dealing with 9/11. I mean, I took my leave right before
Right.
9/11
Okay.
happened.
Okay.
So yeah, I had friends who were flying then, and I flew up to New York right after that to check on some folks.
I bet.
But yeah.
It just to me when I saw it earlier, and it didn't stand out with the other four, the way it was presented to me.
Yeah.
But that was actually written before Miss New York Has Everything.
It was, yeah.
Well, at the same time.
I'm trying to get my own timeline right because, well, the title Spot the Terrorist. So this is before 9/11.
Right.
So, and your wife would tell you these things too, probably. The airline training is insane and wonderful and weird. And, but one of the most insane things we would do, and this is way before 9/11, is we would have a game called Spot the Terrorist where they would show us images of people and we were supposed to spot the terrorist. And if you got the most terrorists, you would win like a gift certificate to
Okay.
the company store where you could buy your shoes or your Marry Me, Fly Free t-shirt. So that was way before 9/11 when we were doing that, you know. So there would be like this picture of this, little old lady, and would be like, not a terrorist. They're like, terrorist. So, yeah. But
It sounds like an airline drinking game to me.
pretty much everything with the airlines is a drinking game. So
Yeah,
thank
yeah,
God.
yeah.
But yeah.
Oh my God. All right, your most recent book, and I know that I've said the title so many times, but I'm afraid to say it because I'll butcher it. Portrait of an Artist at a bingo, and as a bingo worker, like portraying yourself as a bingo worker.
Yes.
And that book encompasses all that you are, right? All the roles that you play.
It's about work and writing. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, my first job was I worked at the Polish Club Bingo in Trafford, Pennsylvania when I was 12, from 12 to 18. Yeah. So start there.
There's a whole book there.
Oh yeah. So yeah. So yeah, and I mean it's again like sort of coming full circle, like talking about that place where I'm from, where I was saying, who do you think you are to be a writer? But trying to talk about work, and writing is work in its own way, not work like real work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it different? Is Trafford different to you now at the point of where you are in your life as opposed to when you were younger? I mean, everything changes, I get it, but like this time we're in Coriopolis, you talk to some folks, it's never changed. You talk to people that come and go, kind of like myself, it does have a different feel. It's different. It doesn't necessarily reflect what's going on with Pittsburgh, but the town's different in a way.
Yeah.
Do you feel that in Trafford?
I mean, yeah, I feel differently there as a person, but I also feel Trafford's different. When I grew up, we weren't really, despite being a working class like Milltown, we weren't very class conscious, and all the money's moved in now. So we've mansions and all around us. Even on our street. I live on one of the original streets.
Right.
But
right.
it's cross-cut with a place called Coventry Court.
It's got the perfect name for it.
Yes. I mean, there are these,
How can you not write about
Bradford
that? You
Square.
know you've written about that. How could you not have written about
Yeah.
that?
Oh, it's just, I mean, the clash of cultures and things and values, it's really interesting to me. But the downtown of Trafford is really pretty sad, and no business is really too much. There's a few new things, but We really could use a boost.
Yeah, a lot of a lot of older towns in southwestern PA could use a business boost for sure, because you have all this influx of money from the people that are working out of the town.
Right.
But the town itself has a concern. Yeah, small town America, it just doesn't.
Yeah.
It's on Trafford, places like Coriopolis, it's not what it used to be. That's for darn sure.
Yeah. We do have a gorgeous Rails to Trails now, though.
Yeah.
Really beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
It goes right off of the Sulphur Creek, which is what we called Turtle Creek growing up.
The Sulphur Creek.
We didn't realize that Sulphur Creek wasn't a natural body of water. We were just like, well, some water is orange and some water isn't. And ours is orange. So
It didn't have any bad odors, did it?
Oh, just, I would come home with my skin stained orange and smelling like rotten eggs, and my mother would be like, were you in the creek? I'm like, no, I was not. No.
No tells there.
No, but the water's clear. It's, and there's fish in it. And so there's all those signs of progress, which is nice. But
Can anyone be a writer?
I think everyone has a story. And I think there's a lot of talent in every single person. I think the absolute...
Quit being nice.
No, I think the absolute...
You don't have to be nice here.
No, that's absolutely true. I really do think that. I have I teach writing, right? So, and nearly all my students have a really great story to tell. But the absolute insanity of sitting down by yourself hours upon hours upon hours in front of a screen, alone, vitamin D deprived, in your basement, that takes a certain kind of crazy. And so I think because writing is hard in that way, it's not ditch digging or anything, but it's really hard. And it's hard because you can spend 10 years, 20 years on a novel, maybe a book or anything, and it will never see light, never publish, but you still write it, right? That's insanity. So could anybody be a writer if they had stories? Yeah. No, I mean, it's like as much as I couldn't be a football player, I mean, I recognize a ball and I could throw it, but I wouldn't have the discipline to do anything.
Yeah.
Like that. You know what I mean? It really comes down to work ethic and
a good command of the English language too, right?
Oh, sure,
The element of being a wordsmith.
Yeah, and you have to read a lot. You have to love books.
What's the easiest way for someone to get out a story? Is it you work with a ghostwriter? What does a ghostwriter actually mean?
Oh, that's a person that you hire to tell your story.
Okay.
So, and ghostwriters operate in different ways. Some just record you're telling a story and they record it.
Okay.
Or you could have pages of drafts and the ghostwriter goes in and sort of tidies them up and then asks you, questions about missing parts. Yeah, but it's mostly for people who have a really good story to tell, but don't want to sit in the basement, do the thing, or don't have that kind of passion for the Oxford comma or whatever. So,
Who does?
My students, they got in a bar fight.
Oh my God!
No, for real.
There's a story there.
A few years ago, my students, God love them, they're wonderful writers, and they were at a bar as they tend to do, and they got in a fight over the Oxford comma. Somebody said it's not necessary. Somebody said it was, and next thing you know,
boom,
it's serious.
Oh my gosh!
So
those writers can be feisty.
It's a personally kind of, that's a real particular kind of crazy. So yeah. So if you don't want to be that kind of crazy, then and you have a story and you want to have a book out, like lots of people want to have books.
Especially now, I think, because the point of entry, you can self-publish with Amazon and all that.
Sure, yeah. It's never been easier to publish a book.
It's still
never
not
been
easy, though.
Yeah, it's never been harder to be read, because there's so much out there. And also you still have to do the work to, even the worst self-published book, somebody sat down and pounded out those pages,
Absolutely.
So it's still physical.
When people say self-published, explain to what that is in 2020 as opposed to, would it be prior internet or prior Amazon? Because I know Amazon makes it extremely, they say it's easy to get things published now. The tools are there.
Yeah, they have that create space and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so before Amazon, there were things called vanity publishers where you would pay a publisher to publish your book. And so,
Whoa. You would pay a publisher, so then you can put the credential on yourself that I'm a published artist.
I'm a published author. Yes, I'm an author.
Yes. An author.
Try
that on. That sounds pretty good.
some of those vanity presses, they would have like these really like sneaky names too. So it's like I flew with a woman who was, she's terrible. But my friend Allison Noel, who is a young adult novelist, we were flight attendants together, and Allison is like, she like owns her own island now. She's amazingly successful. But we both have written about this particular woman. But this woman. Okay, her name is Amy Bratt. There's no reason to hide it. That's her name. She self-published a book when we were flying, and she also would make us like watch in the flight attendant lounge. We'd have to watch her be an extra on movies and things like that. And
I heard a story about this woman.
Maybe either me or Allison. We were both. Yeah. So Amy published her book on Vantage Press. And I said to her, and so she wasn't used to anyone who was a writer being anywhere near her. And I said, "Oh, not Vintage, right?" And she's like, "Oh, what do you know?" And she would carry her book in her suitcase and sell it on the plane all the time. But she paid this press, Vantage Press, to publish her book. So they, it's, again, we were talking about ego earlier. It's a pure ego thing. Now you can go through Amazon if you produced your book. You can hire an editor through them who will like make sure that you don't have typos and things like that.
Right.
Or you can go without that. You can design your own book, or you can pay someone to do it. But again, pretty much anything goes.
Right. Right.
And some of that is really good. Like I mentioned, my husband's grandfather, whose book we published for him. We did that through Amazon,
Okay.
So things like that, life story things for families, it's all really great, and it doesn't hurt anybody to have all that out there, but it's not the same as working with a real publisher and an editor and, that kind of support system. So, yeah. But
I guess I'm really confused in terms of when I was a kid, there was like 5. But now there's 5, and there's a bunch of umbrella or smaller publishers underneath them.
Yeah, all the
like
imprints.
Tentacles. Yeah, the imprints, right?
Yeah, there's so many. It's a very confusing landscape. So
how that happened? Why did the market go that direction? Do you think?
Money.
But I don't understand why the tentacles spread out so vast.
So that each imprint has its own identity,
Okay.
So we
what
publish,
does that mean?
like we publish noir, or we publish romance, or we publish.
So it's that specific.
Cookbooks, or
Okay.
so it's all genre specific usually.
Okay, that was the question I had.
Yeah. Or sometimes those imprints fall under like the names of an editor who has a particular taste.
Okay.
In books. Like my editor at Hachette was Amy Einhorn. And she had her own imprint for a while. And it was just, these are books that are Amy Einhorn books.
Okay. Is a ghostwriter a lot different than when you see like a celebrity, it'll say so-and-so with so-and-so. The with would be there's not a ghostwriter. They're saying, hey, I'm partnering with this accomplished writer who's going to help craft my story. Is that pretty much...
Which is, and that's good for the writer because the writer gets some credit. So that's really good, and it all depends on the contract that you have with a writer. It just really, it varies.
What about the alias things? That always fascinated me when I was a kid. I thought it was so cool, like, almost like a spy. You could write a bunch of stuff and make up a really cool sounding name like Rain Carrington.
Yes. That's good. You thought that out.
When I was younger, I did. Yeah, I'm gonna make this like really saucy, novel for that middle-aged women must love, and I'm gonna call myself. The main title of the character was going to be, or the author's name was going to be Rain Carrington.
That's awesome. Oh my God. Is it Rain R-A-Y-N-E?
No, it wasn't that sophisticated. It was just R-A-I-N, yes. I wasn't quite that sophisticated at 14. I saw those books laying around the house, and my mother would share them with, they would just share books, and and I'm thinking to myself, and the covers were always like Sidney Sheldon books.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I picked one of those up one day. What is my mother reading? Oh. Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But I think like lots of genre books, I went to grad school with a guy who was, is in grad school for writing, a serious fiction writer, but he wrote Westerns on the side, right?
Wow.
But he didn't want anyone to know that because being jerks, we would mock him,
right?
Well,
of course.
Because we're jerks.
Why shouldn't we?
And it was all fun and games. He had a pen name. His pen name was Schiff Davis.
Schiff Davis.
Schiff Davis.
That's not bad.
It's a good Western thing, right? But he's New Yorker.
Almost sounds like a porn star, though. Schiff Davis.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I don't know. I don't know where he's gone from there, but but we were all like, we got wind of this, right? And we're like, can you believe he's writing Westerns? Oh my God. And then one day he pulls up in a brand new motorcycle with this gorgeous laptop, and we're like, he's making money.
Obviously.
All of a sudden, all the poets in the program are like, oh, yeah.
Are there any big mysteries out there with names right now, or we live in such a crazy media-centric world? Are they all kind of vetted out at some point in time?
I can't think of anybody off the top of my head.
I mean, is there a popular writer out there now that the name is there, but they can't find the person? They don't really exist, and they're trying to figure out who they really are.
I don't think so, but I can't be sure.
Goes back to ego. See, once you get some success, I'm like, I'm not going to go behind that name anymore.
Yeah, you want to be
the credit, right?
Well, yeah, like we live in the whole culture where it's like you want to be known.
But what a story that would be, though. There's a story.
Rain. What was your last name?
Rain Carrington.
Rain Carrington. We know who he is.
Damn it! I can't use that now. See, all for the good of the podcast, right? I gave up my pen name. Unbelievable. So you're working on novels, plural, I heard you say.
Yeah, I have 2 drafts of very terrible novels. So
how do you know they're terrible?
Oh, you just know, kind of. Well, actually, the first one, I should walk that back a little bit. So the first novel, a publisher in Chicago really was interested in publishing it and just wanted me to do a couple things, and I lost interest in the novel completely. I thought, I don't want this out there. I don't like it.
Okay.
I don't like it. So, I mean, again, talk about crazy. You write 320 pages of something, just go, nah, I don't like it.
That sounds crazy to me.
I don't like it. So, and then the second one is just like, it's just all over the place. So it needs to be brought back to earth a little bit.
But this is new territory for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because all the names are changed to protect the guilty.
It's totally fiction. Yeah. So, but they're so hard to work on. So I put them on a shelf and sort of. Or we used to put things on shelves before everything was digital. But my husband's a really great example of this. I mean, he has, I lost track. I think he's beating me in book numbers now. I think he has 6 books.
Okay.
And he has like at least 3 times that manuscripts not published. So he's like, he's a really good model of you just keep working and then maybe you'll go back to it. It's there. Don't be precious with it.
My artist friends do that.
Yeah.
I can think of one particular abstract artist where she will paint something. It could be 5, 7, 10 months, a year, 2 years, and then go back and complete it one afternoon based on inspiration, and poof, there it goes.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So does that happen with writing?
Yeah.
I mean, you can literally set it aside.
Oh, yeah.
And come back to it.
You can set it aside and come back to it, or set it aside and come back to it and say, oh, what was I thinking? Yeah, so a little distance helps sometimes, Can
you work on a schedule, though? Can you work on a schedule? Like, I was amazed by some songwriters, some very famous songwriters from all different kinds of genres, that when you really listen to them talk, or I get the opportunity to talk with them about their process, like, in one regard, rock and roll became really mechanical to me once I heard some of these rockers say, I wait till the very end and I feel a lot of anxiety because I have a deadline, and then I can crank it all out in 2 days, lyrically, and even structurally. And you're like, well, what were you doing for the past 9 months, right? But they can sit down and do it almost like they were working with widgets at a factory.
Yeah.
And then you talk to some who just are so esoteric, they could be on that deadline, then the deadline gets pushed, and then it gets pushed. And I guess everybody's different.
Yeah.
But that mechanical process of working, do you set yourself deadlines?
Yeah, and sometimes I do it just to make myself work harder.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So I'm classic for this, where, for instance, my last 2 books, I started to query publishers and agents before I finished them.
Okay.
Which is really dangerous to do,
Yeah.
because you're supposed to have it all done, and then people would be like, "Oh, I want to see it." I'll be like, "Okay, can you give me 3 days?" Or it's just to push myself to go faster.
Okay. Okay. Motivate yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it comes from my background in journalism. I like deadlines. I like the stress of it. I gotta stay up all night now. Drink a ton of Red Bull. So yeah, because you can feel not urgent for your entire life, right? And be like, oh, I'm just gonna play with this some more, and some more, and then you would never finish anything, right? So.
Abstract artists have told me multiple times, I guess all artists, but for visual arts, a lot of your abstract artists just know when something's done. And we could be looking at it going, I could use a little purple over there, and a little, but they know when it's done.
Yeah.
When they sign it, it's done. Might take a while to get there. How do you keep, especially because you're venturing into fiction now, where it's just all wide open, and anything goes. Do you have a mechanism in place that you know when something's done, or is it personal like that, or is it really? Do you think it's more project to project?
It's probably project to project. I mean, you have to have a full narrative arc, right? So your character has to come to some place. And I don't ever map that out in my head in advance, so I don't know where it's gonna end. But
you don't?
No. I wish I did.
Okay.
I mean, some outlines.
So you really have the door wide open.
Yeah, it's terrible. So yeah, I mean, I just get it to a point where I feel like if I were the reader, I could be okay stopping here. I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't know.
Are you a critical book reviewer? Whether you're reading to review, or do you read to review, or do you read for enjoyment?
I do both. Right now, I'm judging a contest, which is an awful thing to do anyway. And I have a stack of books. It's literally this high I've been reading through this summer. And so I find that I read for that particular thing differently, I would prefer not to read like that.
I bet.
I really just, but the books that I prefer to read are, in terms of my taste, is if a book makes me want to write and gets me really excited, and if I read in the bathtub, because it's really hard to get time.
There's a lock on the door there.
There's a lock on the door, which hasn't always kept people away. But are the books that I get really excited about, that make me want to read and make me feel like I'm in the room with the writer and they're talking to me, and those kinds of things. And so I get really excited about that. I think I'm more critical when I don't get excited, because I get sad.
You get sad.
I get a book that doesn't engage me like that makes me sad, if that makes any sense, because I'm just come on, give me something.
But you still can enjoy a book, right? I mean, you're not always looking at it so critically.
No. That's why when I say I get sad, because all I want to do is enjoy.
Okay.
I really want every book I open to be the most awesome book I've ever read.
Okay.
And I want it to make me jealous, and I want it to make me wish I could write better.
Got it. Some musicians I've met say it's hard to listen to music anymore because I'm just so overly critical of my own work, and then I start listening to other things, and I either become frustrated because it's so good, or I would have done something different. They can't get out of that mindset.
Yeah, but I hear them on the Frustrated that it's so good, but for me, it's like I get so excited when something's so good, and I'm like, oh, how can I learn to do that?
Yeah,
you know what I
that's
mean?
the better way to look at it.
But it's really fun too, because you're like always trying to get better, you know. So
Yeah. This was a lot of fun.
so much
Did you have fun?
I had so much fun. Thank you.
I'm so glad you brought your daughter. I haven't seen anybody smile that much for so long in a long time.
My face hurts and I have like a headache. I'm just like over here like.
It really means a lot to me you came in. It
Thank
really
you.
does. I know
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I know it
Awesome.
probably hit you from left field with the request there, but I wanted Pittsburgh authors to be certainly a part of what we're doing here, and you just, out of the group of 12 that I had, your name stuck out, your personality just came through in everything that I read, and I give you my sincerest congratulations too on everything that you've accomplished.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, and please come back and see me.
Oh, I would love to.
She promised.
I do.
All right, friends,
Okay.
we are out.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.